Hello Book Nookers, welcome back. We are going to be covering We Were the Lucky Ones today by Georgia Hunter. I'm going to give you my thoughts, my issues, my feelings. I am not going to give a really in-depth kind of follow through or walk through of this book because I would probably confuse you more than I would help you. It is a bit of a difficult read. Not because it's not a solid story, but because it is told through 13 different points of view. So if you're not a multi-POV kind of person, this book probably isn't for you. But if you can manage it and if you can keep it tracked in your brain, it's a very good read. It's a very heartfelt and just mind-boggling story that is based on the lives of these people. It is historical fiction. It is not a nonfiction, even though the people in this book are real. They all existed. They all went through these periods of time. And this is a dramatized look at their lives during World War II. And it's written by the granddaughter of one of the main characters. Her name is Georgia Hunter, and she is the granddaughter of Adi, who is the middle child in this family. So just kind of a little bit of background on Georgia Hunter. She didn't know until she was 15 about the history of her family during World War II. She discovered it during a family gathering after her grandfather died. And it ended up becoming something she just grew very passionate about. And she began to delve into her family history. And by the time she really got into the meat of her story, she ended up traveling all over Europe and meeting archivists and people who worked in libraries and all of these places that ended up providing her with information on her family throughout the war. Again, true events, but it is fiction. She chose to publish it as fiction because there are creative liberties that were taken during the writing of the book. We meet the family in the beginning, and this is their family tree. So you can kind of see it there. If you want to pause it, I am going to cover it. But the Kirk family, K-U-R-C, and it is Saul and Nakuma. Nakuma is 50 and Saul is 52. They have 5 children. Genek, who is 31. Mila, who is 29. Adi, who is 25. Jakob, who is 23. And Halina, who is the youngest at 21. All of the children have their romantic interest or their spouse. Genek is married to Herta. Mila is married to Salim. They have a 4-month-old daughter, Felicia. Adi is single. He is the only one. Jakob is with Bella. They've been dating for 8 years, but they are not married. And Halina has her love interest is Adam. He is a friend of the family, and he is 31. And it starts right before war has been declared in Europe. So the threat of war has been looming. The family has obviously been watching and waiting, as everyone all over the country. Adi is the only one that does not live in Redesign, Poland. He actually lives in Paris. He is a composer. He's very close with his family, and he goes home every year for Passover and for all the big family events, but he does live in Paris. In the beginning of the book, with the threat of war, Adi is quite removed from the threat because he is in Paris. So he makes plans to go home for Passover and be with his family, and does not realize just how bad things are he writes home and lets his mother know that he will be there for Passover. And between the time that his letter goes out and the time that Passover happens, war has fully set in and things are really bad. And he's unable to make it. But the problem is that mail and communications are not getting through. So no one knows whether or not he is on the road, if he is traveling, if he's been detained. Nobody knows anything. So that's how we start. The family is all together outside of Adi for Passover. And we get to meet pretty much everyone. The one character we don't really get a lot of background on is Salim. And there's a reason for that, which we will cover. You begin to understand kind of the dynamics within this family. Halina, she's kind of a force to be reckoned with, even as the youngest child. Mila, she's a new mom. She's got her 4-month-old. And she's struggling a little bit, even though she's always wanted to be a mother. Genek, he is kind of this fun-loving, carefree. Him and his wife are very happy. They have their own apartment. You know, Mila and Selim, they have their own place. Halina lives at home. Jacob lives at home. And they both have their love interests. So there is this kind of dynamic that you find in the younger Kirk children versus the older Kirk children because of their circumstances. When war breaks out, all 4 of the male children or son-in-laws, or however you want to categorize them, they're conscripted into the Polish army. And all of them are sent to Lwów, where they serve under the Polish army. During this period, Poland falls. So you have Bella and Halina, who are at home. Bella lives with her parents. Halina is with the Kirks. Jacob is in Lwów. Adam is in Lwów, right? We go through these periods of time where, because it's the 1930s and 40s, mail is their only option for communication. So there's so much that happens over these periods of time where things are good when a letter comes in. So people make plans. Bella, she leaves Radom and goes to Lwów because she is told by Jacob that things are good there and that he can take care of her. So she leaves and she goes on this huge journey to get to him. And by the time she gets there, tensions are high. It's not safe for the Jewish people in Lwów because Poland has fallen. And so she gets there and Jacob is so relieved that she's made it. I mean, she's just filthy. She's had to crawl through fields and she's soaking wet and everything is, you know, it's very scary for them. You end up with Halina, her mother, her father, Mila, who has chosen to move back home with her family, and Felicia, her daughter. They're all living in the apartment. And so when Poland falls and the Germans come and seize the apartment, this family they have no choice. They're losing everything. You know, a very well-to-do family. They're tailors or clothiers, however you want to call it. And they've always been fairly well off. And so they lose everything. And, you know, there's silver or jewelry or whatever they can carry, they take, especially if it's very valuable, because they don't know when they're coming back or if. And so they end up being moved into the ghetto and they're living in this 2-bedroom hovel. Sol and Nekuma are put to work in the cafeteria for sometimes up to 16 hours a day. Halina is put to work in the fields picking radishes. And Bella is put to work in kind of like a sweatshop or like, you know, she's doing seamstress work. But she has a child who is an infant. And there's nowhere to leave Felicia, but they're not supposed to take them to work. So she's put in this impossible situation where she's got to figure out how to make sure she can take care of her child and do what she's supposed to do so she doesn't get killed. So she struggles throughout the entirety of the story with doing what she needs to do because of the stipulations put on them by the Germans and what she has to do in order to take care of her child. And you have a lot of moving around within the family. Jakob and Bella eventually are sent off to Siberia. Halina and Adam, after they end up getting married, they bounce between Radom and Warsaw and back to Radom. Adam at one point is taken prisoner because he's believed to be Jewish. Halina manages to save him, posing as a non-Jew with fake papers that Adam has counterfeited. And these ups and downs and the risks that the family takes are just absolutely incredible and mind-blowing to think about. But the level of sacrifice this family has to go through in order to survive and stay together is incredible. When we follow them and we comprehend the level of fear that is around them on their day-to-day existence throughout the war, you hear about the people being killed in the streets, men and women being humiliated and then killed. Once Poland falls, there's regular outbreaks of pogroms, which are organized massacres of Jewish people in the streets. There's bombings, there's fires, there's all of these things that are just so destructive in these areas. One of the largest of which that happens in Warsaw, and in this particular case, Bella loses her sister Anna. So you go through this loss with Bella and how it impacts her and Jakob, because it severely impacts their relationship for a good period of time. And then you are following Adi. So each time that we end up coming back to Adi, it's almost like he's in a different place. Adi is the only one that is not within the areas that are being run by Germany and Russia at this point. He has managed to flee, and he's trying to get anywhere where he's not going to get put into a camp or a prison. So he ends up traveling by ship from Paris. He ends up in Africa and Spain, and then eventually he ends up in South America through a temporary visa that he receives from the ambassador from Brazil. And his story, the entire time, he doesn't know anything about where his family is, if they're alive, if they're dead. All he's doing is holding out hope. He's sending letters, he's sending information. And at this point, you're really unaware of like the things that are available to you as far as like the Red Cross centers and things of that nature. This is something that they're not experienced with. They've never had to do this before. So understanding the steps that can be taken in order to reach family and friends and, loved ones, it's not something they've ever had to do. So you can definitely see how, even in modern day, when you're trying to send something to someone who is on the front in the military, it's very difficult to get mail to them, especially if there's violence where they're at. So considering this is 39 to 45, it's even more difficult. They didn't have the things at their disposal that we have now. I will say that there are certain events that really stood out to me, and they really centered around the characters who drew me in, which were Halina and Mila and Felicia. There is such a strength in the mother in Mila, and Halina being the youngest child and having her blinders stripped away was really interesting to watch, and how it causes her to grow as a woman. She really comes into her own throughout the story. She's very strong-willed, she's very independent again, but she finds the courage and the strength to do things that many people would never consider doing. Her ability to be able to act in this story is incredible. And her ability to be able to acclimate to whatever scenario she is in, she just does so well. She has this very innate ability to put her fear on the back burner and stand up and do whatever it takes to keep them safe, to get the job done, to move on to the next goal. It's so incredible to read from her viewpoint, because you can see the inner workings when it's talking from her perspective, the inner workings of her head, the fear, the absolute terror that she feels, but the fact that she does it anyway. It's such a great way to portray her character, because her character is the youngest. She is the one that goes through so much growth. And she ends up, in a sense, becoming this heroine of the story for not just herself, but her family. The other character that I felt very, very strongly for was Mila. Mila was the young mother. She had always wanted to be a mom. I very much relate to her because I've always known I wanted to be a mom. I have 2 children of my own. I can't imagine not doing anything in my power for them. And Mila is put into just an absolutely impossible situation during the war. She has no husband by her side because he's been taken away by the Polish army, and suddenly she has no idea if he's dead or alive. She's got her child who she has to take care of, and she's trying so hard to do the right thing. And in a situation like this, she's in this position where she's having to second guess every decision she makes. She takes her child with her to work, hides her underneath her clothes or underneath her workstation, because she has no other option. There are moments in the story where the SS come into the workspace and they're doing checks, they're doing inspections. And at one point she's forced to leave Felicia in a bag where they typically keep scraps of fabric. And she's got to make sure that Felicia is quiet, that she doesn't do anything, she doesn't move or anything. The fear that this mother, because they're made to leave. Mila and all the other workers are made to leave the space while the inspection is going on. And Felicia is in this bag. How terrifying to have to do something like that in order to ensure the safety of her child. They don't discover Felicia. Mila goes back after the inspection has completed and they find her and she's safe. But she goes through situations like this over and over again where she has to choose whether she keeps her child or sends her somewhere for her own safety. And at one point, they're thinking that they're going to America. The Germans have come through, and anyone who has skills that are beneficial are collected up, and they're going to go and they're going to send them to America. But it's a lie. They take them out into a field. Mila and everyone on this train car are made to dig their own graves. And by some absolute just aligning of the stars, Mila and Felicia survive and manage to get away, and they go back to Radom. So, I mean, you go through this up and down just roller coaster ride with Mila and Felicia. It's so heart-wrenching. If you're a mother, this book will get you in the heartstrings. It is so poignant when it comes to the story around Mila and Felicia. And you just feel for Felicia as she gets older, because she starts to show the signs and the habits of what war has done to her as a child. It's extremely eye-opening when it comes to the idea of how our upbringing shapes us when you look at Felicia. and you see how she develops over the course of the war. The family, miraculously, even though they've been moved all over different parts of Europe and even parts of Asia, miraculously survives the war. And the whole premise behind this storyline is we were the lucky ones. And the significance of the title is just incredible, because when you think about it, after you go through this roller coaster ride with this family and the things that they've given up and they've sacrificed and they've lived through, they were the lucky ones. They survived. Like, eventually they find their way back to each other. Even Adi, you know, he, through a young woman he meets and eventually marries, he finds his family using the Red Cross. And little by little, they all come back to each other after the war ends. And amazingly, no one in their family has died. It's an incredible story. The fact that the entire family survives is true. That is part of the true part of this story. And they all find their way back to each other. And the parts that, you know, they go through, the majority of the events are true. It's just that there's some creative liberties taken with the details, the nuances. The fact that they go through this harrowing journey, they're shipped off and put into war situations. At one point, Jakob becomes Christian or Catholic for the sake of being able to serve in the army after Russia turns against Germany. So you have, you know, the dissolution of that partnership between Russia and Germany. And even though Russia turns against Germany, he's unable to serve in military because he's Jewish. So in order for him to be able to serve, he poses as a Catholic. And all of this storyline, like, the sacrifices, the changes to their lives, the risks they take, it's incredible. After the war, and they make the decision, they are not staying in Poland. They are not staying in Europe. There's too much heartache and memory and history there. And they've decided that they're going to go to Adi after they find him. But they have to find everyone else first. So eventually, you know, all of the communication starts to open back up, and they eventually find each other. Salim finally comes back to Mila and Felicia. And, you know, at this point, Mila has just kind of resigned herself to never finding Salim again. And the idea that he's alive after 6 years is mind-boggling for her. And Felicia has never given up hope, but Mila had resigned herself. They all managed to find their way back to each other. And after a harrowing journey over the Alps for Halina, Nehuma, Saul, Mila, and Felicia, they make their way over the Alps in order to get to where Salim and Genek and Herta and everyone else are. And eventually the entire family knows that the others are alive. I can't say that they all end up together, because that is something that I had a preconceived idea of when I started this book. Eventually, many of the family members travel to South America, to Brazil, to be with Adi and reunite. The scene takes place right at Passover. So you end up getting to join them, and just the joy that they feel at being back together and being able to know in their heart and in their minds and have that peace settle over them that they are all alive. It's really a joyful moment. The overall story is extremely good. This book did get a 4.5 out of 5 stars from me. I do use the call pile system, which I will go over really quickly as I cover it. I will be putting it across the bottom of the screen. So for characters on this, I gave it an 8. I would say that probably my 8 came from having watched the series as well. I may have given it a slightly lower rating if I hadn't had that kind of preconceived idea of who these characters were. For atmosphere, I gave it a 9. She does a really great job of making you feel like you're really in these scenes. She describes them very well. She manages to provide that feeling of desolation and destruction that you expect to see or feel in a lot of the scenes that are in this book. So the atmosphere in this book, I definitely gave that a 9. For the writing style, I gave it a 7, and that had a lot to do with the multiple POVs. I struggled at times to remember who I was reading about. I'd have to flip back to the beginning of the chapter, or like after the fact, trying to look back and remember who was part of what scenario. That has been a little difficult for me. So I did give a 7 to the writing style because I just felt like it jumped around a lot. And that was difficult for me. For the plot, I gave it an 8 just because the plot in this book to me was the war. So it felt like it was kind of pre-written for her, but at the same time, she really does kind of give you the start, the culmination, and then the end. So you do get that, but it is a bit kind of pre-done for her. For intrigue, I gave it about a 7. This was primarily because I could have gone without some parts of the story, purely for the sake of, not because it wasn't interesting, but because I feel like had we covered less, I feel like it would have flowed a little bit better. And that, I guess, kind of ties back into the writing style. So the intrigue and the plot really kind of tied together in that sense for me. For the logic and relationships, again, this was a 7, just because the relationships were very strong, but the logic in the writing style tied together so much for me that I struggled a little bit with it. And for the overall enjoyment of the book, when I was in the book, in this particular case, and I kind of showed this in the first video I did, but I started off really slow. I had a really hard time getting started with this book, but once I really kind of hit my stride and I had a really kind of good concept and understanding of who the characters were, and I was able to connect better, I really, really got through this book very quickly, because once I was in it, I was in it. And I really enjoyed getting through the rest of this book and just seeing where the journey took them. So as far as enjoyment, I gave this a 10. So, and when you do the calculation for the compile system, that ends up giving a 4.5 stars with what I ended up rating each area. Overall, I highly recommend this book. I would have easily given this higher in a couple of areas had we been able to better focus in on maybe one storyline. So in that sense, I feel like we could have kind of dialed it in a little bit. Sorry about that. Now, as far as my cover that I chose to do as the redesign, there are a handful of items in the story that get talked about, and there is a piece of jewelry that is discussed in depth numerous times in the book, and it is a amethyst necklace that is Nehuma's, and she got it during a trip to Paris at one point, or Milan. She got it, and it was just one of those, she never indulges herself, she never spoils herself, so she decided, I'm just going to get this. I can, so I'm going to. That is one piece that they hold on to throughout the entirety of the war. And so in the cover, I don't put an amethyst in it, but I do use the shade that I felt the amethyst was. And the original cover doesn't really show what the book and the story centers around. It has a picture of a couple sitting on an old wrought iron bench. And so if you were to just look at it, you don't really understand that this is a book about World War II and about the Jewish plight that they faced. And so I felt like tying it into the Jewish side of the story was a good move. So I did use the Star of David in this cover and brought it in as a very poignant part and the central idea of the story. And then I just wanted to I didn't want to take this and make it into some sort of, not cliche, but I didn't want it to be something that didn't convey the reality and the weight of this story. So I kept this cover very simple. The color choice, again, comes from the jewelry, the amethyst necklace, and just ends up, I feel like the cover is a very subtle nod at the underlying message of this story. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you have any questions or if you just want to give me a thumbs up, I would love to hear back from any and all. And I hope I see you guys again soon. So have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and we will be back with another video very soon. We should have something up by Friday. So I am not a we. I am not a we. I'll have something new up by Friday. Enjoy. Thank you.